The last thing Beatrice Kane expected when the blizzard trapped her in that mountain cabin was to spend the night with a stranger. But when the massive figure appeared through the white curtain of snow, rifle in hand and ice crusting his dark beard, she knew her prayers had been answered, even if her heart hammered with equal parts relief and terror. Wyoming Territory, February 1878, had proven crueler than anyone predicted. Beatrice had been traveling from Cheyenne to Laramie with a small wagon train when the storm descended like God's own fury, splitting their group in the whiteout. She had followed what she thought was the main trail, only to find herself hopelessly lost as temperatures plummeted and visibility vanished. The abandoned trapper's cabin had been a miracle, its door hanging crooked, but its walls solid enough to block the screaming wind. Now, 3 hours later, as darkness pressed against the single window, this mountain of a man stood in the doorway, shaking snow from shoulders so broad they nearly filled the frame. He was perhaps 30 years old, maybe a few years older, with shoulder-length dark hair hanging damp against his neck and eyes the color of a storm-gray sky. His buckskin coat was layered with furs, and beneath it, even through the heavy clothing, Beatrice could see the powerful build of someone who lived by strength alone. "Anyone else with you?" His voice was deep, roughened by wind and solitude. Beatrice shook her head, pulling her thin travel cloak tighter. At 22, she'd lived her entire life in Philadelphia before her aunt's death had left her with nothing but a teaching position waiting in Laramie. She had never been alone with a man who was not family, had certainly never spent a night in such circumstances. "I got separated from my wagon train. I am Miss Beatrice Kane." He studied her for a long moment, snow still melting in his beard, then stepped fully inside and pushed the door shut against the howling storm. "Pierce Killian, this storm is going to last through the night, maybe into tomorrow. You picked the right shelter." I had little choice in the matter. Beatrice watched as he moved through the small space with the ease of someone who knew these mountains. He set his rifle carefully against the wall, then shrugged out of his heavy coat. Beneath it, he wore a thick wool shirt that stretched across a chest corded with muscle. His arms, when he rolled up his sleeves to build up the fire she had barely managed to start, were mapped with veins and sinew, the forearms of a man who worked with his hands and depended on his strength. Pierce worked in silence, stacking logs with practiced efficiency. The fire grew from a weak flicker to a roaring blaze that pushed back the cold creeping through the walls. Only then did he speak again. "When did you last eat?" "This morning. I have a little bread in my bag, but I did not want to finish it in case—" She stopped, not wanting to voice her fear that she might be stranded for days. "In case you were stuck longer." He nodded, then reached for a leather pack he had carried in. "I have dried venison and some cornmeal. It is not fancy, but it will keep us fed." The casual way he said "us" sent an odd flutter through her chest. Beatrice had been raised in a world of strict propriety, of chaperones and calling cards. The scandal of spending a night alone with a man would ruin her reputation irreparably back in Philadelphia. But this was not Philadelphia, and survival trumped society's rules. She watched as Pierce prepared a simple meal, mixing cornmeal with melted snow water in a small pot he produced from his pack, setting it near the fire to cook into a thick mush. He cut strips of dried venison with a knife that looked sharp enough to shave with, laying them on flat stones he positioned near the flames to warm. "You live up here?" Beatrice asked, needing to fill the silence. "Most of the year. I trap, hunt, trade furs in Laramie when I need supplies." He glanced at her, and she noticed how his eyes softened slightly when they met hers. "You are headed to Laramie?" "Yes, I'm to be a schoolteacher there." Something that might have been approval crossed his weathered face. "They need one. Last teacher left after 6 months, could not handle the rough conditions. I assure you, Mr. Killian, I am more resilient than I appear." Even as she said it, Beatrice knew how she must look to him. A city woman in clothes too fine for the territory, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins after hours in the wind, her hands soft and uncalloused. "I believe you might be." There was no mockery in his tone, just a quiet assessment. "Anyone who kept a fire going in this cabin without an axe or proper kindling has some grit." The compliment, simple as it was, warmed her more than the growing fire. They ate in companionable quiet, the venison tough but flavorful, the cornmeal mush filling and hot. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind shrieking around the cabin's corners, But inside, with the fire crackling and food in her belly, Beatrice felt safer than she had since the blizzard began. When the meal was finished and cleaned up, Pierce stood and surveyed the cabin. It was a single room, perhaps 12 feet square, with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a sleeping platform built into one corner. The platform had a thin, musty mattress stuffed with what felt like pine needles and dried grass. "You take the bed," Pierce said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I will sleep by the fire." "But you are much larger. You need—" "Miss Kane." He looked at her steadily. "I have slept in worse places in colder weather. The floor by the fire is luxury compared to most nights. You take the bed." There was a finality in his words that told Beatrice arguing would be pointless and possibly insulting. She nodded, suddenly exhausted now that warmth and food had eased her immediate fears. "Thank you, Mr. Killian." Pierce. He was already spreading his coat on the floor, positioning himself between her and the door, she noticed. Protection, even in sleep. "Then you must call me Beatrice." He nodded once, then settled onto the hard floor with his pack as a pillow, looking far too large for the space and yet somehow comfortable. Beatrice climbed onto the sleeping platform, not bothering to remove more than her boots. She pulled her cloak over herself as a blanket, wishing she had something warmer, but grateful for what she had. The fire cast dancing shadows on the log walls. Through them, she could see Pierce's profile, strong-jawed and sharp-featured, his eyes closed but his breathing not quite settled into sleep. He was listening, she realized, monitoring the storm and anything else that might threaten them. "Pierce?" Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the wind outside. "Yes?" "How did you find this cabin? In all that white, everything looks the same." "I know these mountains like most men know their own homes, every ridge, every draw, every shelter." He shifted slightly, his shoulder muscles moving beneath his shirt. "I was checking my trap lines when the storm hit. Figured I would hole up here until it passed. Finding you was providence, I suppose. Providence for me, certainly. I do not know what would have happened if... But it did not happen. You are safe." The certainty in his voice settled something anxious in her chest. Beatrice closed her eyes, listening to the storm and the fire and Pierce's steady breathing. She had never spent a night beside a man, had never even imagined such a circumstance. Yet lying there in the darkness, knowing he was just feet away, she felt no fear, only a strange, warm awareness she had no name for. Sleep came in fits, the unfamiliar sounds and situation keeping her hovering near wakefulness. Several times through the night, she heard Pierce rise to add wood to the fire, moving with quiet efficiency. Once she opened her eyes to see him standing at the window, looking out at the white darkness, his broad back silhouetted against the faint glow of snow reflecting firelight. He looked like something carved from the mountains themselves, immovable and strong. Morning came gray and cold, the storm still raging. Pierce had already been up for some time when Beatrice woke, had melted snow for water and was preparing another simple meal. His hair was tied back now, revealing the strong lines of his face more clearly. He needed a shave, but the dark stubble only made him look more rugged, more quintessentially male. "Still blowing," he said without preamble. "We are stuck another day, maybe more." Beatrice nodded, sitting up and working her fingers through her tangled hair. She must look a fright, but vanity seemed absurd under the circumstances. "Is there enough food?" "Plenty, and I have traps not far from here that should have something if the storm breaks enough for me to check them." He handed her a tin cup of hot water with something steeped in it. "Pine needle tea. Not tasty, but it will warm you and keep the scurvy away." She sipped it, grimacing at the bitter, resinous flavor, but grateful for the warmth. "You are very prepared, Pierce Killian." "Up here, prepared is how you stay alive." He settled at the table with his own cup, and Beatrice joined him, acutely aware of how small the space was, how close they sat. His hands dwarfed the tin cup, scarred and calloused from years of hard living. As the day crept forward, they talked to pass the time. Pierce told her about the mountains, about tracking elk and wolf, about the brutal winter of '73 that killed off half the livestock in the territory. His voice was spare, wasting no words, but Beatrice found herself hanging on every detail. He spoke of solitude and survival with such matter-of-fact confidence that she began to understand how someone could choose this life. In turn, she told him about Philadelphia, about cobblestone streets and gas lamps, about her aunt who had raised her after her parents died of fever, about the small school where she had taught music to bankers' daughters. It all sounded impossibly distant now, like a story from someone else's life. Why leave?" Pierce asked, leaning back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "If you had position, security?" "My aunt's death left me without family. The school paid barely enough to live on, and the headmaster was—" She hesitated, old anger flickering. He felt I should be grateful for his attention. When I made it clear I was not, the position became untenable. Pierce's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "So, you came west. A missionary society places teachers in territorial schools. Laramie needed someone, and I needed a fresh start. It seemed like Providence." That word again. His gray eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. "You believe in that? Providence?" "I'm beginning to. Otherwise, how do you explain this?" She gestured around the cabin. "The odds of you finding me, of this shelter existing at all. Or you could say it is just luck. Good fortune. Perhaps luck is just another name for Providence." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile but close. "You argue like a teacher." "I am a teacher." "Not yet. Right now you are a woman trapped in a blizzard with a stranger." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "A stranger who has been nothing but honorable and kind." Pierce held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, his expression unreadable. "I should check the wood supply." He rose and moved to the small stack of logs in the corner, counting and restacking, giving himself something to do. Beatrice watched him, noting the restless energy in the movement. He was not used to being confined, she realized. This cabin must feel like a cage to a man who roamed mountain ranges. By afternoon, the storm's fury had not abated. They played cards with a battered deck Pierce produced from his pack, betting imaginary fortunes in gold and cattle. Beatrice found herself laughing at his dry commentary, at the absurdity of their situation. Pierce smiled more as the hours passed, his weathered face transforming with the expression. He was handsome, she realized with a start, in a rough-hewn, elemental way that no Philadelphia gentleman could match. That night, the temperature dropped even further. The fire roared, but cold seeped through every crack in the walls, making the floor where Pierce lay brutal despite his heavy coat. Beatrice, on the platform with her thin cloak, fared little better. She curled into herself, teeth chattering despite her best efforts to stay still and quiet. "Beatrice," Pierce's voice came from the darkness, "you are freezing." "I am fine." Even as she said it, another shiver racked her body. She heard him shift, then rise. His shadow fell across the platform. "This is foolish. We both need warmth more than we need propriety." Her heart hammered. "What are you suggesting?" "That we share the bed and our warmth. I give you my word I will not touch you beyond what is necessary for survival." His voice was gruff but sincere. "But I will not let you freeze to death for the sake of propriety, and I would prefer not to lose my fingers to frostbite because I was too stubborn to admit this floor is going to kill me." Logic warred with every rule she had ever been taught. Logic won. "All right." Pierce climbed onto the platform, which was barely wide enough for his frame alone. He settled on his side at the very edge, his back to the wall, creating as much space as possible. "Come here. Turn your back to me." Beatrice shifted closer, her body rigid with nervousness and awareness. Pierce's arm came around her waist, pulling her against him until her back pressed against his chest and his body curled around hers. The contact shocked through her, heat and hardness and strength enveloping her completely. "Relax," he murmured against her hair. "You are safe. I promise you that." Gradually, her tense muscles unclenched. Pierce's warmth soaked into her, chasing away the bone-deep cold. He radiated heat like a stove, his large body sheltering her from drafts. One muscled arm remained around her waist, heavy but not confining. She could feel his breath stirring her hair, slow and even, could feel the solid wall of his chest rising and falling against her back, could feel his thighs tucked behind hers, his knees bent to accommodate her shorter frame. It was the most intimate contact she had ever experienced, more intimate than any touch, because it spoke of trust and care and something deeper than mere attraction. She fit against him as if their bodies had been designed for this, his strength sheltering her softness. "Thank you," she whispered. His arm tightened briefly, an acknowledgement, then relaxed again. "Sleep, Beatrice." And impossibly she did. Warm for the first time in days, safe in the embrace of a mountain man who kept his promises, Beatrice slept deeply and dreamlessly while the storm raged on. Morning brought clarity in more ways than one. The storm had finally broken, leaving a world transformed into white drifts and ice-bent trees. But more than the weather had shifted. When Beatrice woke, still wrapped in Pierce's arms, she knew with sudden certainty that something fundamental had changed between them. Pierce woke soon after, his body tensing briefly as he registered their position, then deliberately relaxing. He withdrew his arms slowly, giving her space. Storm broke. Yes. She sat up, immediately missing his warmth. The cabin was freezing, the fire having burned down to embers. Pierce swung his legs off the platform and set about rebuilding the fire with swift efficiency. Within minutes, flames crackled again, though the cold would take time to banish. He looked out the window at the transformed landscape. "We should be able to get you to Laramie by tomorrow if we start this morning. Snow is deep, but I can manage it." Tomorrow. The word fell between them like a stone. In Laramie, Beatrice would return to the world of propriety and expectations. This strange, intimate interlude would end. The thought brought unexpected sorrow. They prepared for travel in near silence, the easy conversation of the previous day replaced by an awkward awareness. Pierce packed his gear with practiced speed while Beatrice gathered her few belongings. When they stepped outside, the cold hit like a physical blow, but the sun shone brilliantly off fresh snow, blinding in its intensity. Pierce had fashioned rough snowshoes from branches and strips of leather he carried. He helped Beatrice strap them on, his large hands gentle but impersonal, then shouldered both packs. "Stay in my tracks. We will move slow, but steady." The journey was grueling. Even with snowshoes, each step required effort. The snow came nearly to Beatrice's knees in places, and she was breathing hard within the first half-mile. Pierce moved ahead of her, breaking trail, his powerful legs driving through drifts with relentless determination. He checked on her constantly, his gray eyes scanning her face for signs of exhaustion or cold. They stopped to rest and eat at midday, Pierce choosing a spot sheltered by a rock outcrop where the wind had cleared some snow. He started a small fire, melting snow for water and warming the last of the venison. They ate quickly, conserving energy. "How much farther?" Beatrice asked, flexing her aching feet. 6 miles, maybe 7. There's another cabin where we can spend the night. Make Laramie by noon tomorrow." He studied her critically. "Can you manage it?" Beatrice lifted her chin. "I did not come this far to fail now." That almost smile touched his mouth again. "No, I do not suppose you did." The afternoon tested every bit of her determination. Her legs trembled with fatigue, her lungs burned from the cold air, but she pushed on, step after step, following Pierce's broad back through the white wilderness. He slowed his pace to match hers, though she knew he could move much faster alone. Once, when she stumbled, he was there instantly, his strong hand catching her elbow, steadying her. "I'm all right," she insisted, but her voice shook. "You are doing well." His hand remained under her arm for the next 100 yards, lending support without making her feel weak. The second cabin appeared as dusk painted the snow purple and gold. This one was better maintained, with a proper door and shuttered windows. Inside, it held actual furniture, a rope bed with a real mattress, a table with 2 chairs, a well-stocked woodpile. Pierce explained it was a line cabin, maintained by several trappers and hunters who used these mountains. "Someone has been here recently." He pointed to ashes in the fireplace, not yet fully cold. "Within the week." They settled in with the ease of practice now. Pierce started the fire while Beatrice melted snow for water. They moved around each other with unconscious coordination, 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms in a brief, intense span of time. Dinner was better tonight. Someone had left beans and salt pork in a cache, which Pierce mixed with the last of his cornmeal into a hearty stew. They ate hungrily, exhaustion making the simple food taste like a feast. After, they sat by the fire, neither quite ready for sleep. The rope bed dominated the room, impossible to ignore. Both of them knew the night would be cold again, knew what made sense, but the unspoken question hung between them. "Beatrice," Pierce's voice was low, careful. Last night when we shared the bed. It was necessary. She kept her eyes on the fire. Yes, and tonight will be cold again, maybe colder. The bed is bigger, and sharing warmth. He trailed off, then started again. What I am trying to say, badly, is that I do not want you to feel obligated or afraid. I can manage the floor if you would prefer. Beatrice turned to look at him. In the firelight, his face was all strong planes and shadows, his gray eyes serious. This man who could survive anything, who feared neither wilderness nor weather, was worried about making her uncomfortable. Something in her chest twisted painfully. I was not afraid last night. Her voice came out softer than intended. And you kept your word. I do not see why tonight should be different. Relief flashed across his face, quickly masked. All right then. They prepared for bed in companionable silence. Pierce banked the fire while Beatrice used the privacy of a corner to remove her outer dress, sleeping in her chemise and petticoat for propriety's sake, though they would offer little warmth. When she turned around, Pierce had removed his heavy wool shirt, standing in just his undershirt and pants. The sight of him stole her breath. The undershirt clung to his torso, revealing the powerful architecture beneath, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, thick muscles defined even through the fabric. His arms were massive, the result of years swinging axes and hauling game. He was not polished or refined, but raw masculine power. Pierce caught her staring and went still. Their eyes met across the small cabin, and something electric passed between them. Then he cleared his throat and gestured to the bed. You first. The rope bed was narrow but better than the previous platform. Beatrice lay on her side facing the wall, her heart racing. She felt the mattress dip as Pierce settled behind her, felt the warmth of his large body as he positioned himself carefully, leaving a respectful gap between them. But the cold crept in quickly, and without discussion, Beatrice shifted backward until her back met his chest. Pierce's arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and she felt him sigh, a sound of relief in something else she could not name. They fit together even better on the wider bed. Pierce's body curved around hers protectively, his chin nearly resting on the top of her head. His breath stirred her hair with each exhale. The arm around her waist was heavy with muscle, his hand spread across her ribs just below her breast. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, strong and steady. Pierce? Her voice was barely a whisper. When we get to Laramie tomorrow, what happens then? The question hung in the darkness. His arm tightened incrementally. What do you want to happen? I do not know. She struggled for words. These past 2 days have been strange, not normal, but I find I do not want it to end. She felt rather than heard his sharp intake of breath. His hand moved just slightly, his thumb brushing her ribs through the thin fabric of her chemise. Beatrice, I am not a town man. I live alone in these mountains for months at a time. My cabin is rough, my life rougher. You are educated, refined. You deserve better than, do not tell me what I deserve. She turned in his arms, a difficult maneuver in the narrow bed, until they lay face to face, inches apart in the darkness. I have spent my whole life being told what I deserve, what is appropriate for me. Let me decide. His eyes searched hers, storm gray even in the dim light. What are you saying? I am saying I do not want tomorrow to be goodbye. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he could feel it. I am saying these 2 days with you have felt more real, more right than anything in my life before. I am saying, Pierce kissed her. His hand cupped her face, tilting it up to his, and his mouth covered hers with a gentleness that belied his size and strength. The kiss was soft, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Beatrice pressed closer, her hands finding his shoulders, gripping the solid muscle there. He made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, his arm around her waist pulling her body flush against his. She could feel every hard plane of him, the difference between male and female made shockingly clear. His tongue traced her lower lip, requesting entry, and she opened for him, gasping at the intimate slide of his tongue against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. Beatrice, I want you to be sure, very sure. Because if you say you want this, want me, I am going to do everything in my power to make you mine. I am sure. And she was, with a bone-deep certainty that defied logic. I have never been more sure of anything." Pierce kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and claiming. His hand slid from her face down her neck, tracing her collarbone, then lower, cupping her breast through the thin chemise. Beatrice gasped against his mouth, sensation shooting through her body. No one had ever touched her like this. No one had ever made her feel like this, alive and burning and desperate for more. But then Pierce pulled back, breathing hard, his hand retreating to safer territory at her waist. "Not like this. Not in a borrowed cabin where I have to stay quiet so you can keep some scrap of reputation. When I make love to you, it will be in my home, in my bed, with you as my wife." Beatrice's breath caught. "Your wife? If you will have me." His voice was rough with want and something deeper. "I know it is fast. I know I am not what you expected. But Beatrice Kane, I want to marry you. I want to wake up with you in my arms every morning. I want to build you a better cabin, one with real windows and a proper floor. I want to see you teach those children in Laramie and come home to me afterward. I want—" He stopped, then continued more quietly. "I want everything with you." Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes. "Yes. To all of it, yes." Pierce exhaled shakily and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "We will do this right. Get you to Laramie, let you start your position, court you properly, even if I have no idea how to do that. Then, when you are ready, we will marry. I am ready now? Maybe so. But I want you to have time to be certain, time to see what life here really means." His hand stroked her back in long, soothing sweeps. "Now sleep. We have a long walk tomorrow." Beatrice settled against his chest, her body still humming with sensation, her mind spinning with the sudden turn her life had taken. Pierce held her close, his heart beating steadily beneath her ear. She had come west to escape one life and start another. She had not expected to find this, to find him, to find a home in the arms of a mountain man who made promises with his body and his words. Sleep came slowly, both of them too aware of each other, of what had been spoken and promised. But eventually, exhaustion won, and they drifted off, tangled together, neither willing to surrender the contact even in sleep. Morning dawned clear and cold. They woke still wrapped in each other's arms, the night having drawn them even closer. Pierce's hand had found its way beneath her chemise to rest on the bare skin of her waist, and Beatrice's leg was thrown over his hip. They untangled slowly, reluctantly, the promise of propriety keeping Pierce's touch chaste, even as his eyes burned with everything he was holding back. The final stretch to Laramie took 3 hours through snow that was melting rapidly in the bright sunshine. As buildings came into view, scattered homesteads giving way to a proper town, Beatrice felt reality crashing back. She was covered in trail dust, her hair a disaster, her dress wrinkled beyond redemption. She was arriving in her new home after spending 3 nights alone with a man. The scandal would be immediate and probably irrevocable. Pierce seemed to read her thoughts. As they paused at the edge of town, he turned to her, his expression serious. "I will take you to the boarding house where the teacher's supposed to stay. The owner is Mrs. Martha Dalton, a widow who runs a respectable place. I know her. You tell her the storm separated you from your wagon train, and you sheltered in a cabin until it passed. You do not mention me unless you have to." "But that is a lie." "It is survival. Your reputation matters here, Beatrice. Until we are married, we need to be careful." His jaw tightened. "I will not have people thinking poorly of you because I could not keep my distance. You saved my life, and I would do it again, every time. But we do this smart." He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. "Trust me." Beatrice nodded, though everything in her rebelled against hiding what had happened, against diminishing what they had found in those mountain nights. Laramie in 1878 was a rough town, barely a decade old, built around the transcontinental railroad that had transformed the territory. False front buildings lined a wide main street churned to mud by melting snow. Horses and wagons crowded the thoroughfare, men in rough clothing moving between saloons and supply stores. It was nothing like Philadelphia, but Beatrice felt a thrill of possibility looking at it. Pierce led her to a neat 2-story house on a quieter side street. A sign in the window read, "Dalton's Boarding House, Respectable Women Only." He knocked, then stepped back, creating distance between them. The woman who answered was perhaps 50, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with the posture of someone who took no nonsense. "Yes?" "Mrs. Dalton, I am Beatrice Kane. I was meant to arrive earlier this week to take up the teaching position, but the storm—" "My lord, you are the new teacher. Come in, come in. We thought you had turned back when the storm hit." Mrs. Dalton ushered her inside, then noticed Pierce standing on the porch. "Pierce Killian, do not just stand there like a frozen post. Come in." Pierce ducked through the door, looking out of place in the feminine, orderly parlor. "Mrs. Dalton, Miss Kane got separated from her wagon train in the storm. She sheltered in one of the line cabins. I found her this morning on my way in to trade furs and offered to guide her to town." The lie came smoothly, and Mrs. Dalton accepted it without question. "Bless you, Pierce, and bless Providence she found shelter. That storm was a killer. 3 men from the railroad froze to death caught out in it." She turned to Beatrice, clucking sympathetically. "You poor dear. You must be exhausted. Let us get you a bath and a meal, and then you can rest." "Thank you, Mrs. Dalton." Beatrice glanced at Pierce, not wanting him to leave, but unsure how to keep him there without raising suspicion. Pierce settled it by tipping his head respectfully. "I will be in town through tomorrow selling furs. If Miss Kane needs anything, word can reach me at the trading post." His eyes met Beatrice's, gray and intense. "I'm glad you made it safe, Miss Kane." "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Killian." The formality was torture, but necessary. Pierce left, and Beatrice felt his absence like a physical ache. Mrs. Dalton chattered on, leading her upstairs to a small but clean room, promising hot water for a bath and clean clothes if needed. Beatrice let the words wash over her, her mind still in those mountain cabins, still wrapped in Pierce's arms. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice met with the town council, who were relieved and pleased to have a teacher finally. The school was a simple building, 1 room with a wood stove and rough benches, but it was sturdy and well-positioned. She would begin teaching the following Monday, giving her time to settle in and prepare lessons. She did not see Pierce, though she looked for him constantly. Mrs. Dalton mentioned he had sold his furs and taken supplies back up to the mountains, which was his normal pattern. Beatrice told herself to be patient, that he would return when he could, but the waiting gnawed at her. 2 weeks passed. Beatrice threw herself into teaching, finding satisfaction in the eager faces of children who had gone months without proper schooling. The students ranged from 6 to 14, sons and daughters of ranchers, railroad workers, and shopkeepers. They were rough around the edges, but hungry to learn. On a Friday afternoon, as she was dismissing class, a shadow fell across the doorway. Beatrice looked up and her heart stopped. Pierce stood there, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. "Mr. Killian." She kept her voice neutral, aware of curious young eyes watching. "Can I help you?" "Miss Kane, I was hoping I could speak with you briefly, about a matter of importance." His formality was awkward, as if the words did not fit his mouth. The students filtered out, whispering and giggling. Small-town gossip moved fast, and the sight of the mountain man calling on the new teacher would fuel conversations for days. When the last child left, Beatrice closed the door and turned to Pierce. "You came back." "I said I would." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "These 2 weeks have been torture. I needed to get supplies stored, make sure the traps were set, but all I could think about was you. Tell me you have not changed your mind." "Not for a second." Beatrice reached up to touch his face, feeling the rasp of his beard against her palm. "But I did not know when I would see you again. I thought perhaps—" "No," he cut her off. "I meant every word I said in that cabin. I want to court you properly, Beatrice. I want everyone in this town to know you are mine and I am yours. I want to do this right." "Then court me, Pierce Killian." His answering smile transformed his face. He bent and kissed her, quick and hard, then forced himself to step back. "Dinner, tomorrow night. I will pick you up at 6 from the boarding house." "I will be ready." Pierce left before someone could find them alone together, but his presence lingered. Beatrice floated through the rest of the day, Mrs. Dalton's knowing smile suggesting she was not as discreet as she thought. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Beatrice had known in Philadelphia. Pierce was not polished or smooth with words. He showed up on time, clean-shaven and wearing his best shirt, but he was still fundamentally a man of the mountains. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, where his size and rough manners drew stares, but his focus on her never wavered. They walked through town, Pierce pointing out landmarks and telling stories. He introduced her to people with gruff courtesy, making it clear without words that she was under his protection. When a drunk cowboy stumbled too close one evening, Pierce simply stepped between them, and something in his stance made the man back away quickly. Pierce visited on Sundays, the one day Beatrice did not teach. They walked along the river, talking for hours. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera and heading west at 16, about learning to trap from an old French-Canadian who had taken pity on a skinny, determined kid, about the peace he found in solitude, but also the loneliness that had started to gnaw at him before he found her in that blizzard. Beatrice told him more about Philadelphia, about her dreams of making a difference, about the fear and excitement of starting over. They talked about books and philosophy, discovering shared thoughts despite their different backgrounds. Pierce read, she learned, everything he could get his hands on during the long winter nights. He borrowed books from her, returning them with careful notes on scraps of paper, his thoughts on what he had read. 6 weeks after their first dinner, Pierce took her to see his cabin. They rode up on horseback, Beatrice side saddle on a gentle mare Pierce had borrowed, with Mrs. Dalton's very reluctant permission, and only because the older woman's soft spot for Pierce overcame her sense of propriety. The ride took most of the morning, climbing into foothills that were just beginning to green with early spring. Pierce's cabin sat in a valley sheltered by tall pines, with a creek running nearby. It was larger than Beatrice expected, solidly built from logs Pierce had cut and fitted himself. One large room served as living space, with a sleeping loft above, reached by a ladder. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, though simple, showed craftsmanship. "It is not much," Pierce said, watching her nervously. "It is wonderful." Beatrice walked through the space, touching things. His dishes neatly stacked, his furs stretched and drying, his books carefully shelved. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it. I've been working on improvements." He pointed to fresh lumber stacked outside. "I was thinking, if you agree, we could add a room, make it bigger, put in real windows with glass." He stopped, then continued quietly. "Make it into a home for a wife." Beatrice turned to him. "Pierce, I have been patient. I have let you court me properly, let time pass so everyone could see this was real. But I am tired of waiting. I do not need a bigger cabin or glass windows. I just need you." Pierce closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying marry me, Pierce Killian. Marry me so I can stop sleeping alone and start building a life with you." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, pouring weeks of restraint and longing into the contact. His hands moved from her face to her waist, pulling her against him. Beatrice wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing as close as layers of clothing allowed. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I will talk to the preacher tomorrow. We can be married by next Sunday if you are sure." "I have never been more sure of anything." They spent the afternoon at the cabin, Pierce showing her the property, the creek where he fished, the meadow where deer grazed in the evenings. He was animated in a way she rarely saw in town, more himself out here in the wild. This was his element, and Beatrice understood it would become hers too. The ride back to Laramie seemed too short. At the boarding house, Pierce helped her down from the horse, his hands spanning her waist, holding her suspended for a moment before setting her gently on the ground. "One more week, Beatrice, then you are mine. I am already yours. The wedding is just making it official." His eyes darkened with want, but he stepped back, maintaining the propriety they had fought so hard to preserve. "Sunday, 6 o'clock, the church. I will be there." The week crawled by. Beatrice continued teaching, though her mind was half elsewhere. Mrs. Dalton, won over by Pierce's obvious devotion and Beatrice's clear happiness, helped her prepare, providing a simple white dress and lending her own mother's veil. The other women in the boarding house, seamstresses and shop clerks, chattered excitedly and helped with flowers and ribbons. Sunday arrived clear and warm, spring finally establishing its hold on the territory. The church was small but packed, the entire town turning out to see the refined teacher marry the mountain man. Beatrice stood in the back, her hands shaking as Mrs. Dalton adjusted her veil. "You are sure about this, dear?" the older woman asked gently. "It is not too late to wait, to be certain." "I am certain, Mrs. Dalton. Pierce is the best man I have ever known." The older woman smiled, tears in her eyes. "I believe he is, and I believe you are exactly what he needs. Go on now, make your vows." Beatrice walked down the aisle alone, no family to give her away, but she did not feel alone. The townspeople smiled at her, these people she had come to know and care for. And at the front, beside the preacher, stood Pierce. He wore a new shirt, his hair neatly trimmed, his beard shaped, but what struck her was the expression on his face as he watched her approach. Awe and love and fierce protectiveness, all written clearly for everyone to see. This strong, solitary man was hers, and she was his, and the rightness of it sang through her bones. They joined hands in front of the preacher. Pierce's palm was warm and calloused against hers, his grip gentle despite his strength. The words of the ceremony washed over them, traditional and binding. When the preacher asked if Pierce would take Beatrice as his wife, his "I do" was firm and clear, his gray eyes never leaving her face. When it was her turn, Beatrice said, "I do," with equal conviction, her voice carrying through the small church. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Pierce, you may kiss your bride." Pierce cupped her face in both hands, tilting it up to his, and kissed her with such tenderness that Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. It was a promise and a claiming and a beginning all at once. When they broke apart, the church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, stepping out into the bright spring sunshine. A wagon waited, decorated with ribbons and wildflowers by the children from Beatrice's class. Pierce lifted her into the seat as if she weighed nothing, then climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Killian?" Beatrice smiled, loving the sound of her new name. More than ready. They drove out of Laramie amid well wishes and thrown rice. As the town disappeared behind them and the mountains rose ahead, Beatrice felt a profound sense of peace. She was leaving behind everything familiar, heading into a life she could barely imagine. But Pierce's solid presence beside her, his hand covering hers on the wagon seat, made everything possible. The cabin looked different when they arrived in the late afternoon. Pierce had clearly been working. The new room was framed out, the roof extended. Inside, the space was cleaner than before, with wildflowers in a jar on the table and new blankets on the bed in the loft. Pierce helped her down from the wagon, then stood there looking uncertain in a way that was almost endearing from such a large, capable man. "I know it is not much." Beatrice put her finger to his lips, silencing him. "It is perfect. You are perfect. And I am tired of talking." Understanding flared in his gray eyes. He swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her inside and up the ladder to the loft. The bed was larger than she expected, built for his size, covered in furs and the new blankets. He set her gently on the edge, then knelt in front of her, his hands on her knees. "Beatrice, I have to tell you, I do not have much experience with—" He stopped, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "I have been alone a long time. I do not want to hurt you or frighten you." She cupped his face, feeling a rush of tenderness for this strong man showing vulnerability. "I trust you completely. Show me what it means to be yours." Pierce rose, pulling her to her feet, and began unlacing her dress with fingers that trembled slightly. Layer by layer, he removed her clothing, exposing her body to his gaze. When she stood in nothing but her chemise, he stilled, drinking in the sight of her. "You are beautiful, more beautiful than anything in these mountains." Beatrice reached for his shirt, unbuttoning it with shaking fingers. He let her undress him, patient as she revealed his body. His chest was a landscape of muscle and scattered scars, his shoulders impossibly broad, his arms powerful. When her hands touched his bare skin, he inhaled sharply, his muscles flexing under her fingers. They tumbled onto the bed, hands exploring, learning each other's bodies. Pierce was gentle but intense, his restraint visible in every movement. He touched her reverently, his calloused hands creating sensations she had never imagined. When he finally made her his wife in truth, Beatrice clung to him, the brief pain swallowed by the overwhelming rightness of their joining. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin to skin, Pierce's large body curved protectively around hers. His hand traced idle patterns on her back, and Beatrice had never felt so content, so completely home. "I love you," Pierce said quietly, the words rough as if he was not used to saying them. "I did not know I could feel this way about anyone." "I love you too." Beatrice turned to face him, seeing her own emotions reflected in his storm-gray eyes. "From the moment you walked into that cabin, I think part of me knew you were meant to be mine." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her mouth. "Providence. Definitely Providence." They made love again as the sun set, slower this time, learning what pleased each other, building a connection that went beyond words. When they finally slept, exhausted and sated, Beatrice understood this was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just a place, but a person. Not just a life, but a love. The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Beatrice continued teaching, riding down to Laramie 3 days a week, staying with Mrs. Dalton when needed. Pierce worked on expanding the cabin, and on the days she was home, Beatrice helped where she could. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day, falling into each other's arms at night. Pierce taught her to fish, to identify edible plants, to read the weather in the clouds. Beatrice taught him to enjoy books more fully, to appreciate music even without instruments, to see possibilities beyond simple survival. They learned each other's rhythms, the small habits and preferences that made up a shared life. In late summer, Beatrice realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Pierce one evening as they sat by the creek watching the sunset, "I am with child." Pierce went absolutely still, then turned to her with wonder spreading across his face. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. By my count, the baby will come in early spring." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with exquisite care as if she might break. "A baby. Our baby." His voice cracked slightly. "I did not think I would ever have a family." "Well, you have one now." Beatrice leaned back to look at his face. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it." He kissed her deeply, then rested his hand on her still flat stomach. "We will need to finish the new room before winter. Make sure we have plenty of supplies. I want you safe and comfortable." Pierce threw himself into preparations with single-minded intensity. The new room was completed by October, a proper bedroom with a real bed frame and a cradle Pierce carved himself during the long evenings. He brought down extra game, smoking, and storing meat. He made sure they had more than enough firewood stacked. As winter closed in, Beatrice stopped making the trip to Laramie, the journey too difficult in her condition. The town council agreed to hire a temporary teacher until after the baby came. Snowbound in the cabin with Pierce, Beatrice discovered a different kind of happiness. The solitude she had once feared became precious, just the two of them in their mountain home, preparing for the child that would make them 3. Pierce was attentive to the point of being overprotective, monitoring her constantly, helping with tasks she could easily manage. It was both frustrating and touching. When she snapped at him one day, tired and uncomfortable in her 8th month, he just smiled. "I know I am being foolish, but you are the most important thing in my life, Beatrice. You and this baby. I cannot help wanting to take care of you." Her irritation melted. "I know, and I love you for it. But I'm not fragile. I'm just pregnant. You're carrying our child. That makes you precious beyond measure." The baby came on a bright March morning, the snow melting in the sunshine. Pierce had brought down the midwife from Laramie 2 weeks earlier, an experienced woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in the territory. She stayed in the new room, ready for when labor began. When the pains started, Pierce went pale beneath his tan, his normal confidence deserting him. Beatrice gripped his hand through each contraction, drawing strength from his presence. The labor was long and difficult, but Sarah coached her through it with calm expertise. As the sun set, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Sarah cleaned him and wrapped him, then placed him in Pierce's arms. The mountain man looked down at the tiny red-faced infant, and tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Pierce whispered, "absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Beatrice said weakly from the bed, exhausted but elated, strong and determined. They named him Peter, after Pierce's father, with a middle name of Kane to honor Beatrice's family. Peter was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly established his presence in the cabin. Pierce was besotted, holding his son at every opportunity, his large hands impossibly gentle with the tiny body. Beatrice watched them together, her heart so full it ached. This life, so different from anything she had planned, was more than she had ever dreamed possible. She had a husband who loved her fiercely, a beautiful son, and a home carved from the wilderness. As spring turned to summer, she returned to teaching part-time, with Pierce bringing Peter to town so she could nurse him during the day. The children in the school were fascinated by the baby, and Beatrice enjoyed sharing her son with her students. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Peter grew strong and curious, exploring the mountains with his father, learning to track and hunt. When he was 3, a daughter arrived, Catherine, named for Pierce's mother. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. 2 years later, another son, Benjamin, completed their family. The cabin grew with them. Pierce added another room, then a proper porch. He built a barn for the horses and chickens they acquired. What had started as a simple trapper's cabin became a real homestead, a place where their children could grow and thrive. Beatrice continued teaching, her reputation growing until students came from miles around. Pierce trapped less, focusing instead on guiding hunters and traders through the mountains, work that kept him closer to home. They built a life that balanced her need for intellectual engagement with his connection to the wilderness. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the porch in the evening, watching their children play in the meadow. Peter, now 9, helped Catherine climb a tree, while 6-year-old Benjamin chased after butterflies. The mountains rose behind them, purple in the dying light, and the creek sang its eternal song. "Do you ever regret it?" Pierce asked, his arm around Beatrice's waist. "Leaving civilization for this?" Beatrice leaned into him, solid and warm and hers. "Not for a second. This is exactly where I am meant to be. I found you in a blizzard, half frozen and lost. I thought I was just saving your life. I did not know you would become my whole world." "We saved each other," Beatrice corrected. "I was lost in more ways than one. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me everything." Pierce turned her to face him, his gray eyes as intense as the day they married. "I love you, Beatrice Killian, more with every year that passes." "And I love you, always." They kissed as the sun set, 10 years and 3 children from where they started, and Beatrice knew that every choice, every hardship, every moment of uncertainty had led her here. To this man, this life, this love that had begun in a mountain cabin during a blizzard and grown into something unshakable. The children's laughter rang through the valley as the first stars appeared. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight, promising warmth and safety and home. This was their life, built from nothing but determination and love, and it was more beautiful than any dream. Pierce swept Beatrice into his arms, making her laugh, and carried her inside, their children scrambling after them. The door closed on another day in the mountains, another day of the life they had built together, and in the wilderness of the Wyoming Territory, 2 people who had found each other against all odds continued writing their story, one precious day at a time. Years later, when Beatrice was gray-haired and Pierce's shoulders had begun to bow slightly under the weight of decades, they would sit on that same porch and watch their grandchildren play. Peter had married a rancher's daughter and built his own cabin a valley over. Catherine had shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, studying back east before returning to practice in Laramie. Benjamin had followed his father's path, guiding hunters and trappers through mountains he knew as well as Pierce ever had. "We did well," Pierce would say, his hand finding Beatrice's, fingers intertwining with the ease of 50 years of practice. "We did better than well. We built something lasting." And she was right. Their love, which had begun in desperation and grown in devotion, had created a legacy. Not just children and grandchildren, but a way of living that honored both the wilderness and civilization, both strength and tenderness. On the night Pierce passed at the age of 82, he lay in the bed he had built for his bride, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Beatrice held his hand, her own weathered and age-spotted, but grip still strong. "I will see you soon," she whispered, tears streaming down her lined face. "Not too soon," he managed, his voice weak, but still holding that note of protectiveness. "You have grandchildren to spoil." "I love you, Pierce Killian. From the moment you walked into that cabin, I have loved you." "Providence," he whispered, smiling. "It was always Providence." He closed his eyes for the last time with that smile on his face, at peace, surrounded by the family and the life he had built with a woman he had found in a blizzard. Beatrice lived another 5 years, teaching almost until the end, her mind sharp even as her body failed. When she passed quietly in her sleep, her children found a letter she had written to be opened after her death. In it, she told the story of the blizzard, the cabin, the mountain man who had saved her life. She wrote of the nights they had spent together before they were married, of how he had slept on the floor to preserve her honor until she invited him closer. She wrote of a love that had transformed 2 lonely people into a family, a simple trapper's cabin into a home, and a chance meeting into a lifetime of devotion. "I was lost," she wrote in her elegant teacher's script, "and he found me. But more than that, he saw me, truly saw who I was and who I could become. He loved me when I was weak and celebrated me when I was strong. He gave me mountains and valleys and 3 beautiful children. He gave me a life beyond anything I had imagined. If you find even a fraction of the love I found with your grandfather, you will be blessed beyond measure. Remember this: the best things in life often come when we are lost and afraid, when we open ourselves to providence and possibility. I was never the same after that blizzard, and I thank God for it every day. All my love, now and always, Grandmother Beatrice." The letter was framed and hung in Peter's home, a testament to a love story that began with a storm and ended only when death parted them. And in the valley where Pierce had built his cabin, where 4 generations of his family would live and love and build their own stories, the mountains stood eternal, keeping watch over the legacy of a mountain man and the woman he had loved with everything he had, from the moment he found her in the snow until his very last breath.